Hey, good evening. My name is Bill Edgett. Tonight we have guest Tom Maddy on, who is going to be speaking to us about McKenzie Friends here in Canada. Benjamin is going to be a little late joining us tonight, so Tom, I'm just going to turn it over to you to let you introduce yourself and give us a little bit of information about the McKenzie Friend process.
Hi, Bill. Good evening and happy Easter.
Great, thank you. Happy Easter.
Special day in our culture and our country. So I feel very bad for those of you out there who aren't getting to hunt Easter eggs with your children, and that sort of missing out on that opportunity is part of the reason, a big part of the reason, because I went through that I do what I do.
Right. So McKenzie Friend. That's I learned about that a couple of years ago, that people could have friends, and they were known as McKenzie Friends, as support people, join them in court, because it is one of the most traumatic places. It definitely is the most traumatic place I've ever been in my life, and you definitely need some support to get through this if you are a targeted parent. So please. I didn't mean to cut you off there. Let's go and hear what you had to say about this process. I'm very interested to hear about the McKenzie Friends.
Sure. So first off, we should count ourselves fortunate in Canada because we're subject to the common law, which includes the United Kingdom. And so the case that establishes the McKenzie Friend comes out of the United Kingdom. I believe it's from 1976, a case McKenzie v. McKenzie, in which a fellow won an appeal with the higher court because in his lower court's trial, he had not been allowed the support of a friend to help him with his case. And so the higher court ruled that as a self-representative, you are entitled to that support. And so because the case was McKenzie v. McKenzie, that friend became known as the McKenzie Friend. So we have the establishment through common law and precedent that the McKenzie Friend is something that exists. We now have case law. I'm most familiar with the cases in Alberta, some by Associate Chief Justice Rook, but the concept of the McKenzie Friend is fairly well established. The idea of the McKenzie Friend in law and kind of in the justices and the legal system's eyes is that it's supposed to be silent support. So a McKenzie Friend can sit with you in the courtroom, take notes, pass you documents and stuff like that. But I was already in a situation because of my background, which I may get into shortly after this, recognizing that the concept of McKenzie Friend could certainly extend well into helping people prepare their cases and stuff too. You have to be wary, though. You as a McKenzie Friend, as a non-trained legal person, you have to be very wary of the fact that you cannot violate, in Alberta, what's called the Legal Professions Act. So there's certain things that a McKenzie Friend cannot do. Among those is, we cannot give you advice. Advice being sort of on the, you can't tell people what to do with their cases. We can coach, we can educate, we can give information, we can discuss pros and cons of various things from our experience, but we can't tell you what to do. And we can't draft original documents, but we can help you do reviews and edits, stuff like that. So it is a pretty broad scope as practiced by my business and the concept that I did it. I'm hoping in the future to really expand this idea across Canada, because after doing it for 2 years, quite frankly, it works, and it works really well for most people. And it is a fraction of the cost. Roughly, my estimates are it costs 1/7 to 1/10 the cost of a lawyer. Wow. The savings are in two areas. One is a McKenzie Friend is much cheaper. Okay. The second is that the people do as much work as possible themselves. Now, how much work they can do themselves depends on their own abilities. And this is two areas. One, the legal system is full of complex writing, complex reading. So, some people cope with that better than others. So that's the first area of functionality. The second area of functionality is just emotion. Even lawyers, they tell lawyers, don't, represent yourself in court. And there's a reason for that. It's because when you're emotional about something, it's hard to do it yourself and do it properly. So, I think I'm quite good to, present in court and to write documents and help people write documents. But if I have to do it in my own case, I fall into the same traps that so many others do. You get emotional, you run on, you talk about your pain, your angst, the things that are happening to you, and it's not really appropriate for addressing the court. Is it completely inappropriate, as some lawyers seem to think, only the facts? I disagree with that too. So as your McKenzie friend, we certainly follow all the rules of court. We help people to follow those rules and present their best selves to the court. But we also recognize that I want your McKenzie friend to be a little bit disruptive because the system has some flaws, and just going along with it 100% is just buying into and supporting kind of a broken thing. So when I was a senior aerospace manager, we didn't accept broken stuff. We were very motivated to fix it. In fact, if you couldn't fix it, we tended to fire you. So that doesn't maybe happen enough in the bureaucracy and the judicial system. But I brought that same kind of thing. Your McKenzie Friend is the first professional McKenzie Friend organization in Canada. We are federally incorporated with the goal of essentially creating a new career option for people. We want to train McKenzie Friends across Canada. We are currently working on writing a curriculum for that. I am talking to some of the law societies and people who are skilled. We do have lawyers who work with us in our work, a couple of them that have been very useful to talk to and stuff. And they also help our clients over things that we can't do because we're not a lawyer. As I said, there are certain things we can't do. So we have some lawyers who can step in and help clients with those things. The help of a McKenzie Friend, of course, that silent support help in the courtroom while you're speaking, that's a given. That's certainly available. And among that, the courts in Alberta, there is a rule in the Alberta courts that can allow the court to allow a person to speak on another person's behalf in King's Bench. That's at the discretion of the court. In the provincial courts, you can have an agent act for you, which could allow a McKenzie Friend to speak for you at a much greater extent. But we do prefer, we like the clients to speak for themselves, and we'll coach them for that. The reason being that one of our beliefs is that, it's your life that's on your future that's kind of being determined here. You should have as much control and as much involvement as possible. And so we really try to help people do that effectively. I think it's a very different feeling when you've got a hired gun going in for you and they get all beat up and shot up or lose horribly, whether they did good or bad. It's a very different feeling than when you have fought the battle yourself. And, you are the deterministic, you're the determiner of your fate. And I think it's much more palatable, much more acceptable to go down having done your best and knowing that you were in charge versus, you take a loss and somebody else was really pulling all the strings.
I'd like to expand on that because I know exactly what you're talking about. In Canada, I think the statistics Canada-wide were that 95% of divorces resolved prior to trial. So only about 5% of cases actually go to trial. And a judge or a master in New Brunswick informed me that the percentage in New Brunswick is 98% of cases resolved prior to trial. So there's only 2% of cases that ever make it to trial. So that's part of the problem when they have such a high percentage of these cases getting resolved without going to trial, lawyers coming back and going back and forth, and they have case conferences, and eventually a settlement happens before you end up having the trial, which is what happened in my case. But since then, the courts, police, and child protection have been used as tools to attack me in an attempt to get sole custody. And now that the lawyers are no longer involved, no one wants to get involved with the case because a court order has already been made, and no one wants to do anything. They do not want to get involved at this point. So I've been forced myself to, learn this process to represent myself in these matters. And I think that's part of the process when you have so many cases being resolved with the lawyers without going to trial. The hope is every case is going to resolve that way. And the lawyers basically go through the same motions with every case, not realizing they have to treat certain cases a little differently. Otherwise, they're going to have disastrous results.
Bill, there's so much you want to say on this. I want to get into a bit of philosophy too. First off, I see Ben has messaged us and wants to join. I'm okay if you join. Yep. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Yep.
So Ben, where do I start? So first off, the worst place for family law issues is the court. And, again, coming from a professional background and stuff, the lawyer profession is one that really baffles me in a lot of ways. Now I'll go back to my aerospace background and stuff, for example. One of the only ways you got fired from my department was if you saw a problem and did nothing about it. And this is bizarre because lawyers and judges tell me all the time, not only that the family law system is broken, right? And they know it's broken, but they say, well, it's out of my scope. I can't do anything. It's like, man, if I was your boss, you'd be gone so quick. But, they just claim they can't do anything. When you talk to government, they say, well, government has a wall between us and the legal system, and so we can't do anything. Of course they can, because the courts are guided by legislation. A common thing I see in helping clients out is we have the maintenance enforcement program here taking people's driver's licenses.
Yes.
And one of the remedies is to make an application for a stay of enforcement. However, a lot of people don't understand, and an important thing for them to know going into these cases is that a stay of enforcement doesn't necessarily get your driver's license back. And the reason is that there is legislation that the Maintenance Enforcement Program under the Maintenance Enforcement Act has the power to take your license, and a judge cannot overturn that. It's legislation. The judges have to follow legislation at the end of the day. And this is the reason a lot of people don't understand child support. Unfortunately, and this would be easily a 1 or 2 hour conversation, child support is legislated under guidelines. And what the courts have done is they have taken these guidelines as essentially being fixed in stone. And so, one judge who I won't name, because, he simply said, child support is arithmetic. I know what you make. I know what the other person makes. I go to the tables and this is what you pay. And that's it. Now, another judge who I quite liked had the wisdom to say, hey, buddy, like, they're called guidelines for a reason, but it's very hard. Most of the judges, and again, it's because of ease, it's because the director of maintenance enforcement and various people who are making money off this complained, they stick very closely to these tables. And these are legislated, right? The judge doesn't really have any power to go against them. Now, unfortunately, we don't have matching legislation for equal parenting. And if we did, that would be wonderful, because then the judge would, again, have to follow the legislation. So when you write a letter to your MP and your MLA and they say, well, I can't do anything, there's this wall between me and the justice system, bollocks. If you make the legislation, the courts have to follow it. And that's that, right? So that's a cop-out. And there's so many cop-outs by so many people in the system. So philosophically, honestly, one of the great things we can do as McKenzie Friend is we have clients that literally cannot get a lawyer. Their case has gone so high conflict. It's not even a matter of finances. It's just they go to lawyers and they say, look, here's my case. It's high conflict. It's been going on for 3 years. There's been multiple EPOs. There's been restraining orders. There's been abduction of the children, Amber Alerts, all this stuff. The lawyer looks at the 8-inch file and says, well, buddy, first off, it's going to be 10 grand for a document review just for me to get up to date on your case. But you know what? I know the other lawyer. They're highly litigious. And honestly, I just want to sleep at night. So I'm not going to take your case.
Yes. And
blows me away. Look, man, if you don't want to help the people who need the most help, don't be a lawyer. Like, the whole point, I'm getting philosophical, but this is the whole point in the West. We've been bringing up our generation with this idea, do what you want to do. The problem is great societies are built by doing what has to be done, not by always doing what you want to do. And especially at the professional level, people feel, I've gone to university, I've worked hard to achieve here. Now I want the big title. I want the privilege. I want the prestige. I want the high income, the great benefits, but I don't really want to work hard. I don't want to have a big responsibility on my shoulders, which is bizarre because, again, working in private industry for big multinationals, the reason you got the big bucks as a senior manager was because you took the responsibility. Because if things really went down the toilet, you were front and center to take on the responsibility. Yeah. And that, the judges have protections, the bureaucrats have protections. I've gone to court against MEP twice, a few times against Child and Family Services. The bureaucracy protects itself hugely. And it really makes it hard for the average layperson to have any chance to bring accountability or consequences for bad actions. It's a shame. And that brings us to your trial, okay? So this is a terrible statistic, this idea that, only 2% go to trial, so we don't have a lot of conflict in family law. Bollocks. First of all, everybody avoids trials because we all know the cost, the expense, the technicality, the time involvement. At least the lawyers and the judges know, right? The average person doesn't. And that's how they get sucked into this, right? You go to a docket court or a family chambers hearing thinking, oh, it's one and done. I'll go in, I'll get some parenting time. It'll be great. No, you go in, the other parent says you're a horrible person. And now the court's going to explore that. So then the judge goes, well, okay, we're going to do a practice note, or we're going to do an analysis, or we're going to do an evaluation, or we're going to go to a more involved special chambers hearing, right? And you didn't go in knowing that this was the possible outcome. You went in thinking, I'm going to go in the chambers, I'm going to get an order, and it's going to be okay. But no,
Yes.
it's their word against yours. There's a lack of evidence. And so now we're off on this huge process that can take years of hearings. And you have a hearing for parenting and a hearing for support, or maybe they'll try and combine the hearings. But if you combine the hearings, the judge can't hear that in 20 minutes, which is a typical chambers hearing. So now we're going to have a special hearing, but the special hearing is going to be 18 months out. In the meantime, there's holidays, there's job changes, all these things that happen in your life, and all the circumstances change. And then you have to do interim orders. Oh, but maybe they're not going to give you an interim order because you've got a special chambers 3 months down the road. So even though you can't see your kid for 6 months and you'd like to get an interim order to fix this, they're not going to give it to you because we're going to wait till this hearing down the road. And now your kid's being alienated against you. So the judges think, well, because only 2% goes to trial, we don't have a conflict problem in the family courts. Bollocks, you do, because there's all this combat and battle in the lower courts that's just fuming and churning and consuming people's lives and stressing them out and causing suicides and destroying their lives and their financial, structures. And I mean, the saddest case I often see, most common with guys, is they'll try to go on with their life. They'll get a new partner. They'll have new children. And there's absolutely no acknowledgement that this guy has to pay for a new family.
Yeah.
And it's
now,
like all of your responsibility is with the old family. Of course, often the other side, they get to go off and have a new family, no problem, and they can afford it financially. But for the one party that's paying, quite often, yeah, that's it. Like you got to pay the old family first, and that's your obligation. And forget having a new family, forget having a new life. It's I've kind of gone off on some tangents here, but it's very frustrating. So your McKenzie Friend helps people trying to get out of these situations. So we try to get people out of court as much as possible. One thing everybody listening to this should listen to this carefully. You never have to stay in court. Parties can always agree at any point, the day before a trial, in the middle of a trial, whatever. You can always agree, we're getting out, we're withdrawing. We're not going to make these out. You have to do it together, but you have to say, we're not going to go with this process. This process is destroying us. It's destroying our children. It's destroying our society. We're not going to play. We're going to find other ways. So stay out of court, man, if you can.
Yes, that's the best. There's so much that you covered there. We had Alexandra Lasova on just a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago maybe, and she was talking about what you've just explained is financial abuse and administrative abuse, where one party will continue to engage the police or child protection or the court to attack the other party for them and cause them financial damage or distress, and prolonging this process in the hopes of getting what they want. This is happening around the world because I've been a part of support groups since 2016, involved with these same parental alienation, toxic behaviors that are perpetrated by people that generally suffer from personality disorders. And even if you are rich, like you noted that most people don't have the finances to fight these cases, and they can be dragged on for years. Let's look at Brad Pitt, who has no lack of funds to fight this, but 5 years into his process with Angelina Jolie, she got the judge removed, so they have to start all over again in this process. So there's 5 years of litigation and all the money spent gone, and nothing was resolved, and they're starting at ground zero again. So that, to me, would be a form of administrative and financial abuse. And even Brad Pitt, with all his money, this is definitely going to affect his mental well-being and the health of his family and his children. It's horrible. And what are your thoughts on that? Like, you're right, it's the worst place to be. But if you're with an unreasonable person, what other choice do you have other than to try to go and get a court order made so you can see your children?
Okay, so I'll comment on two things here. So first, that is well, it's a conundrum, Bill. Here's the issue. The justice system is designed to give everybody the maximum chance, because the stakes are so high, you get the maximum chance to make your case, to defend yourself, to make your claims and your applications and stuff. That's part of the reason the system, when you have people with enormous resources, this is why it can go on for so long, because the court wants to give everybody every chance so that it's absolutely as fair as possible, right? The problem is the system just takes so long at it. Give you an example from the private world, right? I talked about, one of the only ways you got fired off my team was if you saw problems and did nothing. But I wasn't the kind of manager to fire people easily. I would do everything I could to keep people. I just had to find a way for them to add value. So sometimes I would put them under a different manager. Sometimes I would have to train them for a different job. Sometimes they just had something going on in their lives and we had to talk about it and they could find ways to cope with it. And 90% of the time, I could take an employee about to be fired and turn them into somebody adding value to my company. They kept their job. I got a good employee. Everybody was happy. That's kind of how the court system is. They want to give you every chance, right? So if Angelina Jolie got the judge removed, she probably found some reasonable grounds for that argument. Of course, you can probably say, why didn't you remove the judge in the first or second year, and you only remove the judge at year 5 when you probably lost a lot?
Yes, and that's the way the case was going. And
yeah, and so I mean that's kind of the thing you see is that just the court allows for this. So it's a conundrum. On the one hand, I'm glad the justice system does allow for those fringe cases, where things are really going badly, where there is bias, but you can't figure it out for a year or 2 years. A big problem I commonly see is psychiatrist evaluations, or when children have a lawyer. You have an advocate for the children who's a lawyer, and you don't kind of figure out till this person spent a year or 2 years writing reports, and you start to go through his reports like, hey, this stuff doesn't look like, like even my own kids. When I read the reports of psychologists who talked to them, and I knew my kids very, very well, there was something definitely wrong here. And I see this quite often. But by the time you figure it out, right, they're a year and a half in, you're thousands of dollars invested in them. And I guess the court also takes the view that, well, of course, now you don't like the psychologist because you've gotten a bad report from them. So now you want to get rid of them. And it's not that they're bad at their jobs. It's just because you didn't get what you wanted, right?
And that's not always the case. I want to stop in here because parental alienation, currently my children are undergoing a VOC, a voice of the child, by a social worker who's a clinical therapist, and she is not capable of making a medical diagnosis in my situation. So basically, all the money that I've been forced to pay and that is going towards this VOC is going to be useless, because I'm aware of what the indicators are of child abuse, of course, of controlling behavior, and diagnostic indicators to show that they are suffering from abuse. Yeah. Because I have done a great deal of study and have spoken with a number of professionals. Now, this person who has been ordered to see my children by the courts isn't qualified, and they didn't speak to me to see what my concerns were prior to meeting with the children. So that was all handled by the other party. So again, this therapist is going to be starting off with a biased view of this case and interviewing of the children, which is not going to resolve anything in my case. Now, my case has started back in 2015. It's now 2023, and we still haven't had a trial on any issues. They've tried to keep us out of court because they've made mistakes. They've lost documents. They've hidden trial issues. They've just tried to sweep them away under the rug so they didn't have to deal with them. And the abuse that I've documented it's incredible. And I'm making a documentary called Parental Alienation in the Family Court System. And I've been documenting this process that has happened here in New Brunswick. And also there's another family in Nova Scotia, number of families in Nova Scotia actually going through the same thing. And it is quite incredible how corrupt the system is. Basically, the judge, he awarded cost to my ex when no application was made. So he's awarding cash awards to her, even though she is self-represented, same as myself, and neither one of us made applications for costs. He just took it upon himself to award her a cash settlement because he believes what he's been told prior to looking at any of my information or listening to any of my evidence, which again is part of the process. I got off myself there, but therapists.
So do you remember I mentioned that, in terms of functionality for clients, there's two things. One is their reading and writing comprehension. Mm-hmm. The other one is their emotional ability to cope.
Yes.
And so this is normal. So one of the great things about having a McKenzie Friend is that, we're low enough cost and we're experienced enough and, helpful enough that one of the things we do is we have to make our clients emotionally competent to do what they have to do to self-represent. And lawyers often can't do that because they're too expensive, they're too busy, and I don't think they quite understand the benefits of it. Judges sometimes say they don't like self-reps because they're so emotional and stuff in front of the court. And I suggested to a justice once, I said, well, why don't you just let the person tell them, you're going to put them on a timer for 5 minutes and just let them rant. Just listen to their story, because people are desperate to tell the court how they're hurting, how the court's decisions are hurting them. And this is good information for the courts to hear. They just don't want to hear it, though. It makes them uncomfortable. And that gets back to where I said, if you're going to practice law, if you're going to want that title of justice and you're going to want that responsibility and that big paycheck, it is your duty to listen to those people to some degree. Not enough that it makes your court dysfunctional, but you got to listen to them, hear them. You need to follow your cases. Call people up a year later and say, I made a decision about your family. What was the outcome of that? I've never heard of that ever being done, by the way. I think judges should really, just like any competent organization, you should do some sort of review in the future. Now, to your issues, Bill. So, I don't know Nova Scotia as a province. I'll just speak. I've seen these things in Alberta. The judge hit you with costs probably to be punitive.
Yes.
He was pissed off with you, and he can do that, right? The court has the opportunity to assign punitive damages. Just it's like, fuck you. I'm gonna hurt you because you're pissing me off, and the judges can do that. So
by doing that, they're abusing my children. They're causing great hardship for me and my ability to look after.
You don't have primary care of the kids, do you? There's a famous lawyer out of Calgary, and it was funny. He was giving a talk, and his talk was amazing to me because he was talking how good the system was, how well it worked, and then I got to ask him a few questions. And after I'd asked him a few questions, he kind of had to admit, and I'll kind of quote him on this as I remember. He said, parenting is not enforceable. Now, this is a family law lawyer. He said, parenting is not enforceable. And so I kind of said, well, elaborate. He says, well, here's the thing. What are we going to do with a parent who's not sharing the child? Well, can't throw them in jail, because then who's going to look after the kids? And don't say it's you, because the court's already decided who the kids are with, right? So we can't throw that parent in jail because then the kids don't have a parent. If we find the parent and we take money away from them, that's causing economic hardship for the children. So we can't find them. So what do we do? That's how the court, that's how this lawyer, I don't know, but I assume he's mirroring what he's been taught, what he's been told. That's how the family law lawyers are thinking. So even when they're fighting to get you parenting time, in the back of their head, they're thinking, we can't really enforce this. That scares me. I mean, I'm from the generation in the background that says, the truth be told, though hell happens, right? You do what's right. Yeah. So jail them, but that's our modern system is always about the compromise. And so, it's easy to put the punitive fine on you, Bill, because it's not hurting the kids. At the end of the day, and this is something that I've expressed, I almost feel you have more rights in front of a court in a criminal or a civil matter. If you're a murderer, you're likely to be treated better by a court than in family law, because they have a lot of technical procedures and standards for litigants there that they don't have in the family law system. Yes. And so, I'll share a quick story here. I talked to a person who was on a suicide hotline, and we probably know to some degree the relationship between family law courts and suicide rates. We know there's a correlation. That would be a water is wet study to fund some grad student looking for easy cash. And the sad thing is, it's so easily determinable. So I talked to this person on a suicide hotline, and they said, for the biggest indicators, if somebody calls into a suicide hotline and they say they have no money, that's one really big indicator. And they say they recently lost family, that's second big indicator. And if they have no place to live or to stay, that's a third big indicator. And they have no one to talk to or to express their issues with, that's a fourth big indicator. Any one of those indicators by themselves, you call into a suicide hotline, you express one of those, and they consider you as, truthfully suicidal. They need to be concerned. I then sat in a courtroom and watched the judge take away a person's home, right? They got to leave, exclusive possession granted to the other party, primary care to the other party, so they've just lost their kids. There's that losing of a relative, right? They're hit with a spousal child support order that strips them of 40, 50, 60% of their net income, right? And there's no place to go and talk about this stuff. I mean, that's why McKenzie Friends are good. You talk to us, we know, about this stuff. We understand where you're coming from. But outside, there's not much. That's in family chambers hearing. All four of those things dumped on on a person's head, just 20 minutes. And you don't think like this is going to damage people? It's crazy. Of course it's going to. It's any one of those by themselves is considered as putting people on the brink of taking terrible actions. And now you hit somebody with four of them. I'm amazed how strong most people are. Absolutely shocked how strong people are.
Well, in Sweden, they conducted a study years ago, and it was the largest study I know conducted on parental alienation. And 50% of the parents that took part in the study acknowledged that they had suicidal ideation. So at least 50% of parents who are having their children withheld from them, kept from them, they're not seeing them, we know that at least 50% of these people in these situations contemplate suicide. Now, that's just 50%, I believe is very low, because these were just the people that acknowledged that they were having thoughts of suicide. I also had an opportunity to meet with a suicidologist here in New Brunswick, and he had worked at a facility, and he said, while a number of patients disclosed being suicidal, he said the real people that knew who was most suicidal throughout this building were the people that had an everyday communication with the patients, such as janitors, cooks, and other people that got to see the people every day and weren't interviewing them in a clinical setting. And he believed that the numbers were a great deal higher than what people were disclosing to their therapists, that people were much higher. They thought of suicide at a much higher rate than what was actually disclosed. And I believe that's the same case with all parents that are being kept from their children.
Of course it's higher.
Yes.
So losing your kids is so brutal. I think, look, here's the thing, right? You can't say you're suicidal because you're not going to get your kids back.
That's one of the only grounds on which they can deny access to your children.
Yeah. You get all these crazy circular things, right? This is one of the frustrating things to the courts. The courts will get a person in there fighting to get time with their children. And they're like, well, you've got all these issues, you have no money to, have a good place for them to stay. and maybe you've got some suicidal ideology because have your kids with you and stuff. But the wacky thing is, the fix is giving them some parenting time, right?
Yes.
Like, you don't want this person to be upset and emotional in front of the court. You don't want them to have suicidal ideology. You need for them to have enough money to have a decent place for the kids. But what are you going to do? Well, actually, the solution is actually give them some time with the kids. They get time with their children, they're not going to be suicidal. Give them enough time with the children, they're not going to have the heavy support payments, and then they can actually do fun things with the kids and have a decent place to stay. It's but for some reason they don't figure out or talk about that. I mean, to me, it's obvious.
You're right.
I think it should be pointed out. It's like, well, look, man, I'm like this because I'm not seeing my kids. So why don't you give me a chance? Give me my kids back, and why don't we see what happens? But the court system is predicated on the idea that they'd rather destroy 999 people than that 1 in 1,000 that's going to do something drastic or terrible. And so they're highly conservative. I almost think cowardly to a degree, but they don't want to make any orders that could in some way come back on them. And so they'll take the safe road. If I want to predict the outcome of sometimes chambers hearings and stuff, I have to acknowledge and be careful that you have to make the court as comfortable as possible that there couldn't be any possible blow up or consequences to that order that they made. And they're going to be very careful of that all the time. And so this idea of destroying, 900 plus people because of that 1 in 1,000, that I think that's definitely an attitude that's there, and it's a punishing one. So you have to be careful to navigate that to some degree. But you get the circular things.
I think that 1 in 1,000 is for the criminal courts, where they would rather let 999 guilty people go free instead of sentencing one man to life for a crime he didn't commit. And Judge Judy, a lot of people know Judge Judy. She says the New York family court system is the dumping grounds of bad judges because these judges are not competent enough to stand trial over criminal matters because they don't know the law well enough. So when you're speaking about family courts and criminal courts, you're right. You have more rights in a criminal court than you do in family court. Judges have the ability to make decisions on whatever they want without any repercussions and without stating why they're making that decision. In fact, there was a state we just met with or spoke with Mark Ledwig last week, and he was telling us about the legislation that was created to try and rectify this situation. What they said was, Ben, can you remember that? How they changed the wording? The state changed the wording so that it was, they were trying to legislate equal shared parenting without saying equal shared parenting. And many of the judges were still looking for ways around the wording to award sole custody to one parent over the other. I can't remember exactly how he had worded the legislation change, but
is that using the term rebuttable?
Rebuttable. It wasn't just rebuttable presumption. I know that's what they're going for here in Canada in equal shared parenting. Kentucky has created an equal shared parenting legislation, and Mark said that another state had created it. This was separate from the equal shared parenting. It was they tried to define. Again, I can't remember the way he explained it. It was very good, and it was very legal the way they did it. But he said judges, because this was new to them and a new concept, they were still trying to award sole custody over one parent. That was it. And in previous years, without this legislation, a judge could award custody to one parent over the other. And because you couldn't appeal the decision of a judge, that decision would stand. So now the state changed it. If a judge decides to award custody or more custody to one parent over the other, they have to state the reasons why they're awarding the custody or having this breakdown in custody so that the person has the ability to appeal that decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, appealing is one of the rights in our justice system. And that's what drags out the cost and stuff. So what it comes down to a lot. So Bill, we're talking about the difference between criminal, civil, and say family. So I'll talk about that for a
Yeah.
second. The criminal courts and the civil courts, it's all about the money. In the civil courts, it's typically businesses fighting. They have tax deductions on their legal costs, and they tend to be more well-heeled, so they can simply pay the costs of going to trial, of making appeals. Criminal case, the state pays the costs. And I'll give you an example. So you have an assault occur, right? So two individuals, they get in a fight at the doorway of a person's home, and somebody hits somebody else. And so they go to court, there's charges laid, and now the state, which we call in Canada the Crown, right? Now I'm not going to talk too much about US law, legal system is different from Canadian. So
Much different.
we can't sort of say, well, we're going to follow what they did and stuff. And so we have to be careful with that. But so you have an assault occur, and now you go to court and there's charges laid. So the police are called. The police are making $45 an hour or something, and they're going to investigate. They're going to talk to the neighbors. What did you see? We're going to get the security cams of the house across the road. We're going to interview people. We're going to dig into the history. Maybe this person had assault charges before. We're going to dig up all this stuff, and we're going to pay police officers $45 an hour or whatever to go and find all this evidence. And we're going to give all that evidence to the Crown, and the defense is going to get a copy of that evidence, and then we're going to go to court. Now, that same fight happens in the doorway, but it's a husband and wife, right? And now, right, the police say, well, it's a civil matter, right? They're not going to do the thoroughness of the investigation. So you want to get charges laid and stuff. Well, you got to pay for it yourself, right? You've got to go and find the evidence yourself. It's like all these guys walking around with a cell phone in their pocket, or women who have a hidden recorder in their purse, because when they interact with their ex, they're going to have to record it, or they could go to jail on false accusations, right? False accusations, why aren't those really a thing in criminal court? Well, it's because the state pays people, the CSI guys, they get paid to find out what really happened, but they don't have that money, that chain of evidence and professionals gathering evidence in family court. So it becomes very much he said, she said. And Bill, most judges I've heard, they don't like going to family court. In Alberta, they do a duty rotation. And I was sitting through a civil trial once, and I was just the only witness there. And, there was literally teams of lawyers and bankers' boxes stacked up. And this was a high money case. And at the end of the thing, the court reporter's done, it's all winding up. And the lawyers are talking to this justice. This was in Calgary. And the justice says, yeah, I'm in family court next week. And these lawyers, of course, they're not practicing family law. They say, oh, that's tough for you, man. That's too bad. And the judge is going, yeah, kind of, sucks. I'm on the family court rotation, though. I got to do it. That is so sad, because there's few areas of law where you have the great impact to make our society better than in the family court system. And that goes back to that whole philosophy, right? If you don't want to practice the law where it's needed the most, please don't be a lawyer. Don't be a judge. Go do something else. But they're in there. They don't like being there. And part of the reason is because it's he said, she said, or he said, whatever. But you have people without really properly corroborated evidence making big statements. Kids don't want to see dad. Dad says that's a lie, right? The kids do want to see me. What's the judge going to do with that? How is he going to know you're not lying or she's not lying? Okay, well, we're going to embark you on this evidentiary process, finding professionals who, as you mentioned, are often not really well trained, or they have their own biases and stuff, right, to do this kind of a job. And a voice of the child, frankly, we have what's called a practice note 7 in Alberta. And a big problem with it is first of all, the professionals conducting it are often not very good at doing it. There's a few that are good, but man, their prices have gone up like crazy. A practice note 7 used to cost $5,000 or $6,000, which is already a hardship. Now they're costing like $15,000. And the court sometimes won't make an order until that report is done. So what do you do if you can't afford that report? There's no progress on your case. And if you are the alienated parent, and by the way, alienation is the hardest thing I deal with in my work, right? The only way I know to fix alienation, the only solution I have after many years of experience, you got to get more time with your kids. You have to. All these psychologists who, say, because you're hamstrung. Okay, what's the other situation? Well, you're going to talk to your kids about alienation. You're going to talk about, when mom says bad things about me, that's, she shouldn't, that's not true. That, what does it do? And then you're going to get accused of talking to your kids about the court case or about how they behave in the other parent's house. And that's going to sink you. So the only fix I know is get more time with your kids. So when clients come to me and they're talking about dealing with parental alienation, it really comes about how can we get you more contact time through phone, through Facebook, hopefully in person, from days to overnights, because then the kids can see you firsthand, what you're like as a parent and stuff. So I know there's a lot of people out there talking about solutions and psychological solutions, but I haven't seen too many that actually work, and they're making a lot of money from desperate people off these claims. And that makes me sad. Your McKenzie Friend, we charge on a sliding scale. We try to make it affordable. And so I'm brokenhearted when people who say they've taken up the cause of fighting parental alienation, but it's going to cost you $400 an hour for their support. How dedicated and altruistic are they truly? Sorry, I've gone off on a bit of a rant here, but that's something that's really been bothering me, because your McKenzie Friend, we could charge far more money, but we don't. What's the point of me helping you get your kids in your life, but then you have no money to do anything with them? That's not the point of what your McKenzie Friend is trying to do.
And that's, again, you talk about the difficulties of people in these cases trying to get lawyers. I know of a couple in Nova Scotia. Again, I help run a number of support groups, one for New Brunswick and one in Nova Scotia. And this person told me that they had been in contact with 31 different lawyers or law offices and didn't get a response from any of them about their case. So this case has expanded, has been going on for years, and it's just unbelievable what has happened to this family in this case, and hope to be able to share some good news someday about this family and how things are going with them. I've been communicating with them for quite some time and trying to provide them as much information and advice and help that I could provide, finding cases I've found here in Canada to help them. And it's sad. You're right. It's sad. I'm just an average guy. I work at a mill. I have a decent job. I have a good education, and it's so hard to find somebody that will actually take the time and help people in these situations. You're right. They're all looking for, give me the $5,000 retainer. We'll work it out, and we'll tell you how things are going afterwards. And they don't really care or want to help.
So just, Tom, quick question though, just before you answer, Bill, the child psychologists, the VOCs, the voice of the child, social workers, and then the office of the children's lawyers, are they working in the interest of the judges and the lawyers? Because it looks like most of their reports are very biased. I mean, my own personal experience, where I had an OCL involved, and the report was like totally biased. And I mean, she knew she was being very biased. We appealed her conclusions that she reported to the court, and basically they stood with the decision, even though we knew that much of what she wrote was just off record. It was just, half truth, and they just didn't want to do anything with it. So it makes me think that somehow behind the scenes they are working for their own gains. The OCLs, the VOCs, the child psychologists, they all sort of have some common interest, and that is to basically exploit hurting parents.
So, Ben, I'll kind of focus on your question. So, So first off, they're part of a system. Like, I thought of doing a law degree. I have degrees in STEM areas. I have a master's. I could do a law degree. A Juris Doctorate would not be beyond my capabilities. So many people say, well, why don't you just go to law school, Tom? The reason is I don't want to go to law school for two reasons. One, I don't want to learn things wrong. Okay. The system's not working. I don't really want to learn a lot about the system because I just don't think that that's the solution. We need more creative ideas. When I had a broken process in the factories I worked in, I only weighted very small the input from the team that built that process. When I had a broken system, I looked for people outside for solutions sometimes, because that's often where the best solutions came from. Also, the second reason is you have to be part of the culture to function in it, right? You have to be part of the culture. And you've got to get along with these people. They're your colleagues. They're the people writing your paychecks and stuff. And if you're not kind of towing the line or getting along with them, you get pushed out. And if you spent years getting a degree or training, that's a pretty hard thing to handle. Few people nowadays, and Bill, this goes back to what I said, people have to do what's got to be done, not what they want to do to build a great society. But people are all taught, you want a good income. You want to sleep peacefully at night. You want to have a good life. But what about the people going through the court system as litigants? Their lives are being destroyed. Don't they deserve a good night's sleep? Don't they deserve to keep a good income? It gets forgotten. And it all becomes very much about me. So Ben, yes, a lot of those people are taking care of themselves first. And that's an epidemic of, I think, of our modern society. It's what we've raised our children with, this idea, do what you want. You deserve a good life. No, we deserve a better life than we had before, but life is supposed to be hard. That's just what it's supposed to be if you want to advance. You don't build musculature sitting in a chair. You got to go work out. You don't build a great society by being passive. You're always taking on challenges, and the family court system is a challenge. And the lawyers and the judges and the paralegals and the psychologists involved in it should be very proud, because they have something that they're involved in where they can make a huge difference, a huge improvement in our society and our world. And they're not. And they should be ashamed and embarrassed about that, because they could be making the system better. It would be hard work, but they don't want to do that.
Right.
And so, Ben, you'd be asking people to take on their colleagues, to take on this behemoth of a system that is rewarding them for the way they're conducting themselves now, and they're conducting themselves the way they were trained to conduct themselves. The level of critical thinking, first of all, to question the way you've been trained, is sadly missing, even among PhDs. Critical thinking, unbelievably to me, even in academia, is in short supply. So you're asking people to, first of all, be critically thinking, to question what they've been taught, and then to have the guts to then say, well, I'm going to challenge what's going on. Where's the reward for challenging it now? Like, in management, we say, well, if you come with great creative ideas that challenge the system, you might get rewarded. A lot of times you don't. Good companies do reward, creative and outside the box thinking, but certainly not in bureaucracies. So, so now you're going to take on the system, and your reward is likely you're going to get fired from a cushy job that gives you great pensions, great benefits, a job for life, and not a heavy workload. Of course, that's our modern societal thinking. A few generations ago, we were proud to fight the system. We were proud to take on burdens to create a better future for our children. But people don't think like that anymore. And I don't know how to fix that, Ben. I'll talk about it. I'll talk about it with you guys on this podcast. But that's a huge problem. It's just the way people think nowadays. It's often about the comfort, taking care of yourself, and taking care of those sort of really closest to you. But that sort of broad thinking that I want to create a better future for my children, and thinking about generations into the future, that seems to be lacking. Because if it was there's no way governments would run deficit budgets. And there's no way lawyers and judges would have allowed a system that will ultimately harm their children and grandchildren in family law. They just wouldn't. But that thinking's not there. So, Ben, quick answer is they're doing what they were trained to do, and in the way that keeps them secure and safe in their jobs so they can put food on their tables. Do they know that what they're doing is sometimes wrong? Absolutely, they know. They've told me themselves they know. they just don't have the strength of character and principle to actually fight it. They're too afraid. And that's where I'm just kind of crazy. I don't care. I'm just going to try and do what's right at the end. So so one other thing, just to wrap up, Ben, the problem in the court system too, and you see this in the appeals court all the time, is you always typically in the family law system, because we made the mistake of bringing the adversarial system of criminal justice and civil justice into family law, which never should have been done. And I think there is some talk that, a lot of people admit that was the wrong way to bring this adversarial system in. But because you have winners and losers, right? The other side simply dismisses your complaints as, you were the loser. If you'd been the winner, you'd never be complaining. Right? So one of the things I see when people select a family law lawyer, they want the family law lawyer with the big scores. Section so won for me, got me this, got me that. That's actually not the lawyer you want, because that's a lawyer who can crush the other side. And you don't want the lawyer who gets all the bad reviews. They always lose. The lawyer who's, kind of like, okay, I got some of what I wanted, but I didn't get everything. That's probably the most decent family law lawyer you can come across. Because when families dissolve, everybody should be taking some of the pain, and everybody should be getting some of the relief or the fixes, right? It's not fair to just destroy one side, and Bill, that's where I gave this example, right, of a person walks in the court and they lose everything, house, family, income, they just lose it all in 20 minutes, right? And the other side, benefits. That everybody should suffer to some degree equally. I do see the newer generation of judges that I'm seeing, the younger judges, I think, are a bit better. And something interesting I've been observing lately, I go to court a lot. Something interesting I've been interested is a lot of the younger women I'm seeing are very open to shared parenting right off the bat, even when the judges and the lawyers are trying to dissuade them and telling them to take the kids. A lot of these younger women are saying, like, no, I want the dad, in the children's lives, which is surprising to me, because I'd really developed this idea that, one side was always seeking to get full custody so they could get that money. And I'm seeing younger women happily seeming more open to sharing parenting time.
So where do we stand, Tom? I mean, based on your experience as a McKenzie friend, where do we stand with shared parenting in Canada? Do you think there's any hope down the road?
So shared parenting is still far too rare. I think if you see shared parenting in practice, it's highly beneficial. My observation is people who share the kids have very good quality of lives. They often have a new partner in their life, so they'll get a week with their new partner to work on that relationship, to focus or to focus entirely on their career, and then they have a week of the delight of having their children in their lives. We have this bizarre idea in Western society. I lived in Asia for 15 years. And one of the bizarre things we have in the West here is that children are this horrendous responsibility and this big job we have to take. We completely fail to discuss the happiness of being a parent, all the great things that come from it. I would say, on some level, every parent fighting in family court and saying, well, I need money to take care of this kid, and I need this to, take on this responsibility. On one side, they know that they're going to be compensated with all this joy of having these kids in their lives. I almost think it'd be more fair for the courts to say, you know what, the person who loses the kid should be compensated, because they're losing out on doing Easter egg hunts and, waking up to having breakfast with your children and all the fun and happiness that goes with being a parent. That should truly be compensated. So until our society acknowledges that children are not just a burden and a responsibility, it's going to be a hard pull to get shared parenting. Because the attitude right now is, well, someone's going to have to take on this burden, and the person most able to bear it is, deserves compensation for it. And of course, as soon as you're monetizing, as soon as anything you monetize, you're going to get more of. That's a common thing. So as soon as you're monetizing, the idea of non-shared parenting, which you're going to get the most money, right? In Canada, 60-40. I've seen huge arguments about that 42 versus 39%. Huge arguments, because somebody's going to lose money right? They'll argue like crazy. The 60-40 thing. I mean, just stupid. Easy enough. You get 10% time with the kids, knock 10% off the child support. Common sense, easy to come up with, but I guess common sense solutions are not so common.
No, they're not in the family court system. And
Yeah. So until we develop a sense of I think that children are not this horrible, terrible burden, that they're a joy to share, and that time with children should be distributed equally to both parents, as well as the burden and responsibility. Because like I said, the parents who have that lack of parenting time, they can focus on other things to enrich and fix, move their lives on. And when you have the children, you get the joy of having the kids. So shared parenting is for sure, I think, the best way. And it's also been my observation that the kids do far, far better as well. But, they always want experts to come up with this. And having been a professor, having, an adjunct professor and stuff, my respect for academia is deplorably low these days. Asking the experts to do the studies on this, I don't think you're going to get much useful real world stuff to work with. It's I'm reading this book right now of studies about parental alienation. I'll just grab it really quick to show you guys. One sec.
Sure.
So this is an academic study, right? And this is full of like, this is academic reading, right? And I can say, like, from my experience in the real world in life, there's not much there that's really actually practical and that I could put to use to help a parent avoid alienation. So, So Ben, where are we with shared parenting? We have a long ways to go. The problem is not just that the courts can fix it. There's literally societal values and principles right now that are preventing us from moving towards it. The fix really should be coming from ourselves, right? Try not to go to court to deal with family law issues. You can do anything you want. You can do any shared parenting plan you like, as long as you keep the courts and the state out of it. You want to do 60-40. You want to do 1 year on, 1 year off. You want to live 1 year with the kids with France and 1 year of the kids in Spain. You can do all of that. Just don't involve the courts. You can do almost whatever you like. Support also. Remember I said those tables are legislated. We should discuss the household ratios test someday. But those tables are legislated, right? They create a lot of hardship for people, and the enforcement agencies are draconian. So just don't use them, right? Come up with a fair system yourselves. The problem is there's always people that cheat, people that take advantage. I have some very nice clients who offered, let somebody pay low support for a lot of years, far lower than would have been on the tables. And all they got was taken advantage of for it. So people need to be fair to each other in coming up with these solutions. You're far more likely to get shared parenting faster at cheaper cost if you do it yourselves. If you expect the court to do it, Bill, the court will typically get there at some point.
Yes. 8 to 10 years. 8 to 10 years in most cases I've seen, yeah.
Yeah, it took
and
me
they
7
need to have a specialist brought in at that point.
It took me 7 years, and actually it was a court in a totally different jurisdiction that finally resolved it for me. But yeah, it takes a long time. And again, you talk to lawyers and judges, they say, right, the wheels of justice turn slow. And then a lawyer used to always tell me, so he says, justice delayed is justice denied. Do you understand? Yeah. We have two sayings in the judicial practitioners, right? And these two sayings completely clash.
Yes.
One of the funny things I've come to realize is, and again, the courts even say, like I've heard other lawyers say, don't go to the courts for justice. Well, where do you go? And they say, like, don't expect the courts to resolve your conflicts. But that's the whole point of why courts exist. The whole point of existence is to resolve conflicts and to bring justice. Like, if you're not doing that, buddy, you're not working. And you need to acknowledge you're not working so that you can start fixing yourself. But that attitude's not there. I think the fix for shared parenting, I know, Ben, you'd like to hear that it's going to come from the legislators.
Yeah.
It could. They could legislate it tomorrow. They could. And don't let your MP and your MLA slough you off that, oh, it's going to take years. I can't. No, they're not telling the truth. They're just being lazy and feckless. They could do it very fast. I've seen some cases involving, I can't think of the one case here, but it was involving a dispute between a lesbian couple or something, and it was even overseas. And they got together and very quickly in Parliament passed some kind of a law to fix it, right? So it's just our group doesn't seem to have the voice right now to carry influence because we have a counter voice, right? We have this counter voice constantly fighting us. Is every time there's been an attempt at shared parenting legislation, as I understand it, the law societies, the lawyer societies, and a lot of feminist groups fight it.
Yes.
Despite the fact that 85+% of Canadians, support shared parenting.
You're right. And I think it's even closer to, in the States, it's even higher. I think it's closer to 95%. They did a study out of Rhode Island, I believe, and 95%. Didn't matter all the different statistical anomalies, whether male, men, women, age, groups, religion, everyone seemed to agree and support shared parenting. 95%. That's overwhelming. Yet still no one wants to take the side and go against it because of, again, these lobby groups that are lobbying against the equal shared parenting legislation.
Societies are smart. Here's the thing, right? The hive mind of a society, of a people, the justice system is supposed to serve the people. And so when the majority of people are saying you're not doing it right, that there's problems, you need to listen. I've heard several lawyers and some judges comment saying, well, they're not smart enough. They're not trained enough. They don't understand the law. You know what? It doesn't matter because the people you're supposed to serve are saying you're doing it wrong. And that's something you should be paying attention to. It's extremely hubristic, extremely arrogant to say you don't have to listen to the very people that you're supposed to serve.
I agree.
And make these comments. And yeah, the average person, if they say, I don't know, my brother, my father, my uncle, I'm hearing these stories, something's wrong here. There's probably something wrong. When 85% of the people are saying, this is what should be happening, that's probably what should be happening. And then you should be making every effort to ensure that it happens. That arrogance and that hubris to say, well, no, I'm just not going to pay attention. You're probably wrong. When you get thousands and thousands of people saying something, that's either what you should be doing because your job is to serve society and the people, or that many minds with that much world experience, with that many years of living, that many different experiences across different jobs and different strata, etc., they're actually right and you're wrong. And that academic hubris, that arrogance that comes with a job title or something, it's very debilitating and damaging to progress.
Yeah.
Not just in family law these days, but in a lot of areas.
That's good. Our time is fast spent. Bill?
Yeah, no, thank you. Like we're over the hour mark, and I just want to say thank you, Tom. I really love to talk to you some more because I love your theories and a lot of the philosophy around why things are broken, and I really love to have the opportunity to speak with you more in depth on this. And hope I have the chance to. Ben, thank you for joining us late. Sorry for jumping in there. Tom hit a number of issues that hit nerves with me, so I was.
Tom, thank you so much.
Bill. As a McKenzie friend, one of the things I like is that as a McKenzie friend and self-practicing, I can tell people maybe what they need to hear, not what they like to hear, right? And sometimes that's important. I can explain maybe why the courts have done something to you that is going to piss you off, but yeah, the courts can do that. And let's talk about how we can avoid them doing that to you again or something. But sometimes, I have to talk about things people don't like to hear. And just I came prepared to talk a lot about McKenzie Friends, and we didn't talk as much about that as I thought, but I guess I can summarize, first sort of professional practitioner trying to create this as a career. the company is built on the foundations of the philosophies I've shared with you guys. So if you kind of want to know what your McKenzie Friend, which is my company, is all about, those are the philosophies that kind of build it. And that's a bit why I don't necessarily want to become under the current system, right? We want to be a bit disruptive, but we also want to work with the current system.
Yeah, you don't want to be controlled by the. Again, I believe that's part of why lawyers aren't representing their clients, because they don't have to. There's other people that are going to pay them, and they can just not do any work, because if they're going to represent their client, they're going to have to take on the judge and the system, and that's going to be detrimental to their career. And no lawyer is willing to do that for their client. I think that's one of the biggest problems right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in a way, like a lot of lawyers they truly think the system is working, right? They think it's right. And if you read the legislation, like if you read the rules of court, if you read the child support guidelines, there's actually a lot of good stuff in there. There really is. It's just not practiced the way it's written, or I think even the way it was intended for. You know, it's like the justice in Edmonton that said, you know, to the opposing counsel, said, look, these are guidelines. They're not fixed in stone. I can deviate from them. But then the judges got their butts handed to them in a couple of appeals. And after that, they said, like, yeah, these guidelines, now they're locked in, man, unless it's a hardship application. And that's a hard bar to hit. You know, they're just going to rule like it's arithmetic. Well, if it's arithmetic, man, we don't need a $500K a year judge sitting on the table. Just put a calculator there and we can do it. But it's funny, you know, like we have some good rules of court in Alberta. We have what's called the litigation plan. I think it's rule 6.13 or 6.8. I forget. But, you know, we have a litigation plan. Every lawyer could sit down with their clients and, just like any good project manager, say, well, look, you know, we're going to start with a docket court. We might do a family chambers hearing. Docket court, every order can be done by consent. We could do the whole thing through a series of consent orders in docket court and be done, you know, a couple of orders later, and a joint divorce filing, we're finished. You know, we could do that. But if the other side opposes, here's what happens. And you make a plan, right? I've very seldom seen litigation plans in family law, despite it being, I think, a very excellent idea to talk to clients about. A notice of facts, you know, agreeing on the facts in advance so that you stop arguing about the same things over and over. But, like, what are the facts agreed on? There's a form, there's a way of doing that, but it's just not used. And I find that very puzzling, because there are some good tools there that the lawyers could use to help their clients. I think maybe a lot of it's legacy. You know, I came in to manage a maintenance team in a factory in aerospace in Asia. And I had a maintenance team that literally they got machines running, but they never like followed the manuals and stuff. So the machines broke down really fast. And the problem was that the history of doing things right had been lost. And so we had these older guys training the new guys, and they were training them to do the things not correctly. Yeah. And so I remember giving this big talk to my team saying, look, if you don't know something, that's okay. You know, I'll provide the funding or the training, and that's good, right? And so I gave this talk that was really interesting, because I said, it's bad to know nothing, but what's worse than knowing nothing? Well, it's knowing things wrong. And so I had to explain to my team what that meant. And right now, I think, again, it goes to this thing that it's not working. People are saying it's not working, but no one's sort of admitting to that and fixing it. They're just steadfastly going ahead, doing things wrong. And so there has to be this admission, and the courts don't admit they did things wrong easily. I mean, try running an appeal someday. I see the Western Lights coming through my window now, so one whole side of my face is just all you know, I'll shade it here. So actually, I wish it was a little halo above my head. That would look much better.
Yeah, I had a couple of guys, you know, from Alberta that I was talking to them about you, Tom.
What's that?
You know, I had a few guys from Alberta, Calgary specifically, you know, who were trying to find some help.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Actually directed them to you. I'm not sure if they contacted you yet.
I haven't anybody mention you, Ben, as being referred to me from you, but, you know, happy to hear from them.
Okay, I'll follow up with that.
Anybody can look up our website. It's McKenzieFriend.ca. So that's McKenzie friend.ca. I got a little website there. If people want to help with this project to make McKenzie Friends a big thing, get in touch with me. I really, I'm my background, as I said, is other areas like aerospace and stuff. Trying to create good websites for this and stuff I'm kind of new to. But so if people have some skills for things like that, that'd be useful.
Yeah, I can help you for website.
Oh, terrific. Well, we should definitely talk offline
Yeah,
then.
I can help with that. Yeah.
And I'd like to be able to help in any way I can, as again, to try and help other people throughout the situation. I applaud you for what you're doing and trying to help others. And that's one of the things that I found hardest. In my case, I felt alone. No one understood what I was going through, and you have a very good understanding. And that's what people need, is someone who understands what they're going through so they can try to get help and help them recover a little bit from the trauma they're experiencing instead of further traumatizing them with this experience. So
yeah, that help is necessary. And I think this is one thing I want courts and lawyers to understand, is that McKenzie Friends can help people like emotionally tone down. They can understand what the courts are doing, why, kind of the way the system works. And then when they go in front of the courts or they're working with a lawyer, those lawyers, those judges have a much easier time to work with that person. And so that's one of the ways I'm trying to convince and get support of the justice ministries of justice, of the law societies, because, they're frustrated with self-reps quite often. And so, the McKenzie Friend can in some ways repair that emotional damage, help people to get into a situation where they feel they have some control, that they feel they have some agency to
give them some direction so they can properly represent themselves.
Yes. Oh yeah, for sure.
But it would be nice for us to have you back, Tom, just to talk about Family Court 101. Because I find, the moment separation or divorce happens, everybody's in a panic mode.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Oh yeah.
And because of that panic, we all tend to do a lot of mistakes along the way. And the first point of contact is to call a lawyer, right? So, I mean, I'd love to have you back to just talk about Family Court 101, what to do when you're in this situation and how to get help.
Okay. First thing, don't panic when you get those court documents. Don't panic. You've got some time. The courts in general will be fairly tolerant if you need it. That first adjournment is especially if you're looking for a lawyer or you're trying to prepare yourself, they'll be fairly fair. If you're served a claim, the statement is a statement of defense is the first response, maybe a counterclaim, but you have 20 days to do those, right? And the forms are available on most courts' websites, so you can get that form, fill it out, and then file it back, and you're on your way. So don't panic though. Try to stay calm. And I guess that's where good talking to a friend, especially a McKenzie friend, who can tell you, don't panic. Here's what you can do. Is useful.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Tom.
Yes, thank you very much
for your time. And like I said, we'd love to have you back. Just to focus on McKenzie Friend and how McKenzie Friend can help. A lot of parents that are going through some of these, some of these crises that we have in our countries. Thank you so much.
Anytime, guys. Let me know if you'd like me to come back, and I'll try not to get so philosophical. I love talking about these things because I'm really trying to kind of fix the world here a little bit in my small way, right? And I certainly think families are the foundations of great societies. So I think if we can fix the families, we'll go a long ways towards fixing a lot of other things. So I guess that's why I tackled this one first and foremost, but also because I went through my own experience with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We'll have Tom back for sure, to talk about McKenzie Friends and what we need to do the moment we are faced with, some of these crises in the family court. Thank you so much. And, we'll be, once we agree with Tom on the date, we'll let you know definitely when he's coming back. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
All right.
and happy Easter.
Bye, gentlemen. Bye, everyone. And again, happy Easter.
All right, so Tommy can stay behind for a few seconds. I'll
Oh,
just
yep.
go offline.